Alright, 10 years later, and Game of Thrones is back, and this time I'm finishing the whole thing, okay? But I'm real glad that I went back and watched this because, unlike when I was watching this for the once or twice that I did like 10 years ago, it was actually rather easy for me to keep track of things. Yes, I can't keep track of exactly everyone's name, but I can keep track of who has a relation to who, more or less, the motives that each main character seems to be trying to do and all that stuff, and it was just a lot easier this time around. Yes, there's backstory that I'm not entirely getting, but I think that's the point of this because this is a story that takes place after a decent amount has already happened. It's trying to fill you in as you go along and all that jazz. That type of storytelling used to be the norm decades ago, you know. We didn't always have where just about everything from the beginning is explained and then the few details you're not missing that you are missing, then they get filled in later, you know. We didn't used to have that. It was perfectly normal to jump into a story where a whole generation of events has already happened. Bend. But yeah, this was a lot of fun to watch at this time because I got a lot more of the noble families or people going after each other, even though in reality what's going on is it's really the Starks versus the Lannisters, even though a bunch of these people, if you really were to ask them about this, they don't care that much. It's just because of the honor of the society and that kind of a thing. It's the people that were at the King's Landing area that really have bad motives because you have the ex of Ned Stark's wife there, assuming that they even were an item. I'm starting to think not. Not because, you know, he's trying to get Ned into a bad position because of jealousy about the situation, even though he made it clear that it was actually Ned's Stark's brother who was originally the one trying to woo the person he wanted, truthfully. And then there was the fact that Ned Stark is actually the second person to figure out through context clues that the two main Lannister people are actually having an incestuous affair, even though it does. I could have sworn that Ned Stark did throw in a line though that said that the king did have two legitimate children, but I don't think he's counting the bastard son that was the steel worker's apprentice who then got the boot and meets up with. Um, I don't think her name's Arya, but it's so close to Arya. We have Dany Aragon that I'm just gonna call her. That you're just gonna have to deal with this, okay? Because I can't keep track of everyone's name, but I do know the faces, okay? Hey, it's just, yeah, I picked up on a lot more this time around. It was very easy for me to keep track of all the noble things in comparison. And it's really interesting to see Peter Dinklage's character in here because, yes, he's a Lannister, but he's the black sheep of the Lannister family, who's a lot more removed from the politics of the family, but nonetheless gets roped into it because of circumstantial evidence, though, because of how the society, you know, expresses themselves. He chooses to not flat out say it wasn't me until way further down the line. Now, to be fair, he really wasn't given that much of an opportunity by Lady Stark and her sister, but yeah. And then that guy who stands up for him, I think his name is sort of like Brom. It's real interesting to note this guy because when I first saw this, I felt like he was a bad person, but now I realize no, actually, this guy is somebody who's willing to think for himself, views himself as just one minor guy in a whole web of rich people versus rich people, but he's taking a step back and examining things because you get the idea that he isn't 100% in favor of Tyrion, but does agree that he's being given an unfair situation, so he chooses to stand up for Tyrion. Not much for Tyrion himself, but the idea that Tyrion was expressing. And when he was facing that other guy in combat, I realized, oh, no, this guy's being really strategic, because the other guy dresses up in a full suit of armor, huge sword, huge shield, whereas Brom there, he takes a sword that is of standard strength and then flat out refuses the helmet and the shield because he knows that's just going to slow him down. And if he's going to be the other guy, he has to tire him out and then attack him. But the whole bit about, oh, he fights with no honor? Okay, first of all, if he had just ran to the other guy with just that sword, he would have lost. And don't you notice that when he was attacking that guy, there were like 3 different opportunities. He could have gone in there for the kill shot, but chose not to. And when he was about to kill the guy, he actually paused and looked right at Lady Stark's sister. So you know that if she had said, stop, he probably would have, I think, even though that wouldn't have been the most common thing. But seriously, yeah, this guy is not the bad guy. Sheesh. You could tell that other guy only did it out of duty, not because he actually believed in anything, so yeah. It's just real interesting to get this different perspective on a couple of characters once I'm older. Although that monk guy who had his testicles chopped off, I'm not so sure that he was truly on Ned Stark's side, but I think he did definitely not like that other guy. But at the same time, he knew what he was up to. Right. But also, Lena Henley's character, just Jamie and Tyrion's sister, just like, I really wonder what her overall plan is. Yes, it's to get her kid on the throne, but what's her plan after that? I mean, yes, it's to get rid of the Starks, but that's only because she has to. She started that war against them, so now she, more accurately her father, who's also Theo James's father in the Underworld movies, they've got a big war on their hands, but just what's the plan after that? Especially since what none of these noble people realize is that the real people that they need to worry about are to the north of the Wall and across the sea, because the very first scene of this whole thing involves someone of the Night's Watch seeing what we presume is the White Walkers. I could say something about that, but I don't want to spoil anything from further on because I have seen Season 2 once. I don't remember that much from it, but this thing that I'm withholding... But yeah. Yeah, because that's where all the real action is, and then the character of Snow, yeah, he's not doing that much, but he really wasn't in the position to where he could do anything, because, he is a bastard son, but the difference is he's a bastard son that nonetheless is appreciated by a decent amount of people, because his commitment to Robb Stark, that isn't blind loyalty, and the guy who's always with Robb Stark, who's, forgive me, whore girl, who later ends up hooking up with, not exactly hooking up, but getting a lecture from the person that wants Lady Stark, because it's definitely the same girl. Like those two characters, it's going to be interesting to see what they do with those two, if indeed they do anything at all. Because they're giving them just a little too much presents for you to just completely write them off. that kind of a thing. And at the same time, okay, that other guy who's constantly with Robb Stark, who mentions that he was from another land originally, but is going to help out the Starks. You would have thought that he was the fifth Stark child, because you have Robb Stark, you have Sestra, the girl who's going to be wed to Jaime Lannister, Arya, and Bran. But you would have thought that that guy was the fifth. No, it turns out it's a kid that's actually even younger than Bran is, because you encounter him while he's being held up with that chick from Beyond the Wall that reminds me of Helena Bonham Carter, who, it's not her, obviously, that goes too young to be Helena Carter, but yeah. But you gotta pay attention to this stuff, and then how Snow is tied to both the Stark family and then what's beyond the wall, and how he's seemingly got a choice, but now he ends up choosing to go beyond the wall with the whole Night's Watch, which is odd because they've mentioned that their numbers have been dwindling over the past X amount of years, and now all of them are going beyond the wall, but there's no way to make a relay system, that kind of a thing. And also, I looked at a map of the whole Westeros nation, or the Seven Kingdoms and whatnot. It seems like that wall is leaving like an eighth or so of the land beyond it. So that would imply that we're at some point going to see quite a lot of what's beyond there. So somebody took the time to map most of that area, around it at least. So, And again, we don't really know why the wall is there. We know why Daenerys and her brother were banished from the land, but we don't really know why the wall is there. That's going to be real interesting to find out. And Snow's definitely going to play a part in this, because his dynamic is going to have to change, because we need somebody in that group to progress the story along. Someone that we can relate to and can relate to other characters, yes. But it's more than that. Because you got to figure out what's beyond there, how it's a threat to everyone else, and then you're going to have that threat emerge eventually. You don't just create something that ominous and then, So I'm real curious to see what's going to happen from there. And then Daenerys, this time I was really able to note how she goes from being someone who isn't innocent, but in the grand scheme of things, she was so young when the thing happened, she effectively was, and then how she goes from being a cultured woman to willing to lead people into battle, even though they don't really participate in any battles in this situation. Sure, at the end of the season, once Jason Momoa's character is reduced to the catatonic state because he foolishly let his wound get infected, but that would have been very common back then because they didn't have the understanding of medicine that we do now. I mean, for crying out loud, half the reason George Washington died was because after he got pneumonia or whatever the heck it was in the last couple of days of his life, he told doctors, remove some of my blood. Pfft, dude, that's just going to make things worse. Come on. But anyway. You just see her go from being timid to having a lot of potential to be a fighting force, but very little power because she's a woman. But with those dragons there, even though they're just impaling dragons, there's potential there. And then the guy that she's with, they don't explain all of his backstory, but I bet they're going to explain more of it in future seasons. He's going to play a really ominous role here because he's going to have to change from being basically the bridge between the two cultures to being Daenerys' embassy at some point here. We're going to figure out why he ended up being in that situation and just, right. So it's going to be interesting to see what he will end up doing. But the weird thing was, at the point that he was offered a pardon in there because of some network of spies or people being sent over the seas to try and track him down, and you could tell that he considered it. That was not just a simple bit of hesitance. Because, I mean, like, he could tell that the pardon itself was real, but at the same time, would he have gotten, backstabbed or done dirty a little bit down the line? Probably, yeah. And I think he knew that, but... Right. So I know that this wasn't the most organized thing, but you gotta remember, I've seen this season before, so I knew the broad strokes of what was going to happen. I just appreciated the final details of this season a lot more. I've only seen the second season once, and my memory of that season is a lot more hazy, so in many ways, when I watch the second season, it's going to be almost a new experience for me. So I think I've rambled on long enough. See you in the next vid.